Hello everyone. So in yesterday's video, I was hinting at the fact that there is a new way of looking at the issues that INTJs and particularly INFJs have with the SE function. And what I was saying is that the new angle that we can look at the challenge through is by considering that since we have an NI world, since we operate with an NI unconscious, which colors our experience in every way, and since the SE function is by itself mostly unconscious, therefore it's mostly in the unconscious, and the challenge of individuation is mostly to kind of bring it out of the unconscious. Well, SE has to be able to come out of the unconscious. But this process of coming out of the unconscious, the process of integration, can and often is hindered by the fact that SE is not thriving in the NI unconscious. It's not thriving in the NI unconscious because the NI unconscious is not a hospitable place for SE. And by the way, when I say this, you can also immediately understand that someone who were to take up my approach to typology and look at any other type would be able to make the same argument, saying like, okay, the INFP has an FI unconscious, like an FI dominated unconscious. And at the same time, they want to bring TE out of the unconscious, but it's inhospitable. How does it manage? So you can apply that in many ways, but I think it's a particularly acute question in the sense of in the case of the INFJ, because unlike other types, the NI dominants are in a particularly privileged position when it comes to accessing the contents of their own unconscious. This is what intuition facilitates and bringing it into outside reality, which also suggests that there's probably a way to facilitate the relationship with SE that we don't exploit enough, that we don't take advantage of enough. But if we could, it probably would be something empowering. It seems to me that one of the keys to SE integration, because there's not just a single aspect to cover, but the aspect that I want to cover in this video is, it is about making our unconscious a more hospitable place for SE. It is by making our unconscious a more hospitable place for SE that SE will be able to get out, rather than being kind of sucked down by this black morass of inhospitable intuition. How do we do that? It'd be easy to say something like completely impossible, because we do not control our unconscious. It's not something that we control. It's unconscious. It's inaccessible. Okay? And this is true and not true at the same time. You cannot control your unconscious. It's true, otherwise you'll be conscious. But you can relieve your unconscious. You can relieve your unconscious. And the idea here is that anxiety, right? Considering that the two most anxious types of INFJ are the compliant and the solipsist. Anxiety is always, like nearly always, the result of an overfull unconscious. An unconscious that is so full of contradictions that it has to kind of make contents come out, but never in the form of integration, more in the form of things that burst out of the unconscious and manifest as slips of the tongue, as bungled actions, as, things that we forget by doing that we were supposed to do, just, like moments of, where anger breaks out, like lots of ways, impulses. Those are all manifestations of the unconscious. Of course, dream activity, of course, when you have weird dreams and things like that. The unconscious needs relief. It has what sometimes psychoanalysis calls paths of alleviation. It needs to, get stuff out. And someone who is, like, say, the spiritualized INFJ, for example, since we like that person and consider them quite integrated, we can really assume that the spiritualized INFJ is an INFJ whose unconscious is not overfull like that. There is conflict within the unconscious of the spiritualized INFJ because the Unconscious is always the site of those battles, right? But it can be managed. And I think that when there is a lot of conflict and instability in the unconscious of a person, including in the case of an INFJ unconscious, that will make the NI world more chaotic and inevitably more hostile to contents that are, especially first of all, almost like an internal scapegoating of contents that are not aligned with its cardinal traits, such as the SE function. So your unconscious is going to be all the more hostile to SE if it is already suffering from intrapsychic conflict. And that's also going to manifest as anxiety. So it's not so much that not using SE leads or causes anxiety. Like there is definitely a correlation between not using enough SE, being like removed from SE and feeling anxious. But the causal mechanism is not in the direction of I don't use SE enough and that makes me anxious. It's actually much more I am anxious and therefore I'm not able to integrate SE enough. And therefore I'm not using SE enough. And in turn, feedback loop, that makes me more anxious. But it starts with anxiety, existential anxiety, that I'm not going to give you clues as to how to do that. Like the quintessential example would be to do like self-work or, some form of therapy that allows you to become more familiar with the conflicts that exist within your unconscious. And it's very difficult to do by yourself. We have to be honest about that. But only by becoming aware of the conflicts that exist, by speaking them, do we allow what's called their abreaction. You're able to feel the affect that had been sort of severed from the content in such a way that the content being severed from the affect became an agent of trouble within your unconscious. So reconnecting those severed parts is a way of reconstituting your unconscious world in such a way as to reduce how pervasive intrapsychic conflict is. And with more peace and less conflict, there's every reason to assume that SE, as a relatively unintegrated unconscious function, will have more room to then emerge when there are situations in life for it to emerge, for it to be called upon. Because sometimes the INFJ may really want to use SE, may say, I'm going to use SE right now, but if their level of anxiety is really high, and if my theory is correct, they're not going to be able to use it in very much a conscious way, even if they really want to. Even in situations where they say to themselves, okay, I will be social, I'll put myself in a social situation, play collective sports. This is something that I've recommended. And I think it's good for you to use SE in that way. But what you want is not just to be used by SE. The feeling that sometimes SE just happens and we can see that we're using it, but we just don't have integrated control over it. We don't really have volition associated with it. And I'm starting to realize that can be a lifetime pattern of SE use. We could be using SE a lot, but never in a way that's integrated, including when we play a lot of sports. So I think that really the first issue that we need to address, and hopefully I've cast some light upon that, is existential anxiety related or connected to too much conflict in the unconscious. Let me know in the comments what you think, guys. I'd love to talk more about this topic, but if it's a little bit like abstract or a little bit kind of complicated, I want to know as well, so I know how to, what sort of approach to take in my future videos on the topic. Don't give me a like if you enjoyed the video, guys, of course. And don't forget, I've written 2 books on the INFJ, the Infinite Soul, being my latest one. INFJ Life in a Modern World looks at how INFJs can find happiness, purpose, and meaning in a world that they often see, and with reason, as hostile. And yet this is our world. We need to find ways to flourish within it. This book looks at all these issues. A lot of people like it, a lot of people love it. Check the reviews. Maybe you will want to get it if you haven't already. And the Ecstatic Soul is the prequel. The first book kind of put my name on the map in some ways, a new look at the INFJ personality, and that's the deepest investigation into the INFJ to this day that you can find online. Deepest look into the INFJ minds, what it's like to think like an INFJ, what's it like to be an INFJ, experience the world as an INFJ. And as usual, guys, don't forget that the lifeblood of my channel is your kind generosity and support. I have a Patreon page that you can have a look at. The link is below. It helps me massively. I could not do it without you. I rely on your kind donations to keep going with my content. You get some cool perks too, you know, such as access to our special Discord server, the Fourfold, where you can interact with me and a lot of other cool people, and also bonus videos every 2-3 weeks that I make myself, a deep dive on a topic of your choosing. It's really good stuff, so if you're interested, definitely consider it. Okay guys, see you soon. Bye-bye.